Next tonight, failings at every stage. That's the finding of a review of the way that probation officers dealt with a man who went on to kill his pregnant partner and 3 children. Damien Bendall will never be released from prison after the murders he committed in Derbyshire back in 2021. Our social affairs correspondent Jeremy Ball reports.
Terry Harris was murdered by Bendall while she was pregnant with his child. He killed her with a hammer at her home in Killamarsh, along with her children, John and Lacey Bennett, and Connie Gent, Lacey's friend, who was there for a sleepover. Today, a scathing report raised questions about whether their deaths could have been prevented. The Chief Inspector of Probation says Bendall shouldn't have been assessed as suitable for a curfew sentence at Terry's home after he'd been convicted of arson the year before. The Probation Service also failed to take account of Bendall's previous convictions for violence and allegations of domestic abuse.
They got it completely wrong. The probation officer in the court team seems to have done very few checks, actually. There doesn't seem to be a record of them doing any police or children's services checks. They missed very obvious risks that he presented on the case file. For example, previous reports from the police, from the child sexual exploitation team.
This is Bendall shortly after the murders, taking John's Xbox to exchange for drugs.
I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
And this is Bendall being arrested by Derbyshire police after he dialed 999 and confessed.
I've murdered 4 people.
The Chief Inspector says the Bendall case shows a probation service not fit for purpose, understaffed with undertrained officials who were struggling with unmanageable workloads.
If he'd been correctly assessed as being of high risk, he would have had an experienced and qualified probation officer. He would have been seen on a weekly basis, face to face. He probably would have been referred for multi-agency arrangements, so probation could have worked with the police and children services to make sure that all of his risks were being properly managed and dealt with.
Bendall's now serving a whole life order for murder and rape. The Probation Service says it's made significant improvements and it's apologised to his victims' families. But John and Lacey's dad, Jason Bennett, says their murders broke his heart into 1,000,000 pieces.
Well, Jeremy's with me now, mate. It's just hideous, this case, Jeremy. But, you know, what is today's report actually going to achieve?
Well, it's prompted 17 different recommendations, first of all, and to improve the criminal justice system. Every one of those has been accepted. And the Chief Inspector's conclusions today are pretty scathing, really. Mr. Russell says this was a deeply concerning case. The Probation Service's assessment and management of Bendall at every stage, from initial court report to his supervision in the community, was of an unacceptable standard and fell far below what was required. And that lack of supervision happened after Bendall was transferred here to the East Midlands. That was only weeks before he murdered Terry and those 3 children.
Well, why did these probation teams get it so terribly wrong?
Well, today's investigation identified several reasons why they underestimated the threat that Bendall posed. First of all, they relied on an initial court report. They didn't question its assessment of his risk. Then Bendall was supervised by probation staff who weren't sufficiently experienced or qualified. And his victims' safety wasn't given enough consideration either. That was especially troubling, this report says, because Bendall had started drinking and smoking cannabis again.
And I guess this case is going to have far wider implications.
It will. There's now an action plan to respond to those 17 recommendations we heard about. A very familiar one, first of all, from the Prisons Minister. More information sharing with police, with local councils. A lot more money's being spent as well, first of all, on those better checks and also on recruiting thousands more probation staff. The Chief Inspector, though, says he still has deep concerns about what they're finding in the Probation Service, Anne, and he says it's vital that they learn lessons from this case in order to strike a better balance between supporting offenders into crime-free lives and protecting the rest of us.
Yeah, of course. OK, Jeremy, thanks very much indeed for that.